News. Let's get into some news. Some interesting news going on. Some of it will be covered in the intel. There's a lot going on. And tomorrow could be bedlam. I will warn you of that. Could be a nice bedlam, but I expect it. The clowns are getting a bit desperate. Anyway, a federal judge in Texas last Friday has thrown the health coverage of some 20 million Americans into limbo by ruling Obamacare must be scrapped because Congress struck the penalty for failing to obtain insurance coverage. And the invalidation of the landmark 2010 law is certain to send shockwaves through the US health system. I wish it would. After a midterm election seen in part to rebuke to Republican efforts to tear down Obamacare, the decision will be immediately appealed, says a California Attorney General Xavier Becerra, who led a group of blue states in intervening to defend the law. Now, ultimately, it could become the third major Obamacare case to be taken up by the Supreme Court, which has twice voted to uphold the law. Maybe not going forward. District Court Judge Reed O'Connor, who was a George W. Bush appointee in Fort Worth, Texas, issued the decision which gutted the law in response to a lawsuit from 20 conservative-led states that sought to have the Affordable Care Act tossed out. And they had successfully argued that the mandate penalty was a critical linchpin of the law, and without it, the entire framework is rendered unconstitutional indeed. Now, the decision came a little more than 24 hours before the sign-up period for the 2019 Obamacare coverage, which was set to close. President Trump also acted on Friday and abruptly named Mick Mulvaney, the current director of the Office of Management and Budget, as acting White House Chief of Staff. Tick-tock, we did warn. Mulvaney replaces John F. Kelly, a retired four-star Marine Corps general who failed to impose discipline on a chaotic West Wing and was ousted last week by Trump after the president grew tired of Kelly's restrictive management. Now, there has been a number of mixed messages. You're going to see a lot of mixed messages in the Portal People news. I would suggest ignore most of it, but that's just me. But the length of Mulvaney's tenure was not decided, and whether that post would be permanent, with aides saying Trump wanted to preserve flexibility. And Mulvaney's tentative appointment caps for now at least Trump's week-long search for a third chief of staff in 2 years, after the president's first choice turned down the job and other candidates removed themselves from consideration. Smart move, I would say, at this point. Also leaving, US Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is leaving his post at the end of the year, and Trump says in the latest high-profile departure, there has been more. We'll cover that shortly. In a tweet, Trump thanked Mr. Zinke for his services, saying he'd achieved much in his tenure and he would appoint a new Interior Secretary next week. Now, Mr. Zinke is an ex-Navy SEAL and a former Montana congressman, but has been embroiled in allegations of ethic violations, fraud and corruption again. They include a land deal in Montana involving Mr. Zinke and the chairman of Oilfield Services, Halliburton. Big hint. The Interior Department oversees federal land, including national parks such as Yosemite and Yellowstone. And Mr. Zinke has faced scrutiny over expensive trips to US park helicopters and also on private jets. And also costly alterations in his department also came in for some criticism. including that 3 sets of double doors in his office were being upgraded at a cost of nearly $139,000 for 3 new doors. Really. All very Halliburton there. But he later said he had negotiated the price down to $75,000. Like that makes much difference. $25,000 per door. It's a bit like the $1,000 toilet seats, isn't it? And yes, he was military. Nigeria's military has revoked its earlier 3-month decision to suspend activities of the UN Children's Agency, UNICEF. And they were operating in the northeast of the country. And the military said this came after extensive deliberations during emergency talks with UNICEF officials. And on Friday, the army had accused the agency of spying for Islamist militants in the region. Yes, they're all involved. Millions of people displaced by the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast are dependent on humanitarian aid. And the statement came just hours after the military accused the UN agency of spying for the Islamists, and they also stated that the UNICEF staff train and deploy spies who support the insurgents and also their sympathisers. No surprise to listeners of GHI. UN, peace. As Kim says, UN like a piece of this and a piece of that. Nothing to do with peacekeeping or looking after children either. We've all heard about that as well. Off to Germany next. Nation states must today be prepared to give up their sovereignty, according to the outgoing, TikToking German Chancellor Angela Merkel, told attendants at an event by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Berlin, on Wednesday, in an orderly fashion, of course, she suggested, but she went so far as to condemn those in her own Christian Democratic, and I've said that deliberately, Union party who think Germany should withdraw from the controversial UN Migration Pact. There were politicians who believed that they could decide when these agreements are no longer valid because they are representing the people. But the people are individuals who are living in a country. They are not a group who define themselves as the German people, she stressed. Really. She has previously accused critics of the UN Global Compact for Safe and Orderly Migration of not being patriotic, because that is not patriotism. Because patriotism is when you include others in German interests and accept win-win situations. It's funny how they changed the word patriotism, isn't it? Which is another word for fascism. When it suits. You know, fascism was everything to do with Germany, and also the discrediting of the Aryan race by using that as a political tool. And now all of a sudden it means include everyone. But she's not alone, as her words echo recent comments made by the French President Emmanuel Macron, who stated in a Remembrance Day speech that patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. No, it's not. Because nationalism is treason, according to Mr. Macron. I think he has more pressing concerns, because he's another one on TikTok. Where next? Australia. According to a new policy currently being considered by MPs in Australia, unless you've filled out an official opt-out document, your organs will automatically be donated after you die, according to them anyway. And the changes are supposed to help curb the illegal organ trade. Funny that, because Australia take part in it. Lots of it. Anyway, under the new law, Australians who go overseas to receive an illegal transplant will be criminally prosecuted upon their return to the country, and doctors will be required to report any suspicions they have about patients who might have received an illegal organ donation overseas. And this is all because of an article in the Sunday Telegraph that reported almost 100 Australians had travelled overseas to have black market transplants, even paying up to $250,000 for a kidney transplant in some instances. And they're saying it's all down to a shortage of organ donations. Now, it's to keep that criminal racket going of trafficking. That's what that's about. Maryland Province Jesuits. Next, a Catholic religious order with priests serving throughout the Washington area and across 8 states, released a list on Monday of priests in the order who have been credibly accused of abusing children since the 1950s. The list includes 5 living Jesuits and 3 who left the order, and also 5 who died. You're going to see a lot more of that. Canada next. We're certainly getting about this week. But there's a dire situation going on in Ottawa about homeless families, and they are making an effort to put them into places, but some of the places they're putting them into really aren't suitable. But more homeless families are set to join the hundreds already living in hotels and motels across Ottawa, as demand for appropriate shelter space continues to surge. Now, between 2014 and 2017, the number of chronically homeless families seeking shelter in Ottawa leapt by 143%. Now, in the past year alone, the city has signed agreements with 6 more hotels and motels to house homeless families, traditionally that being a last resort. But with the recent closure of one of the city's 2 dedicated family shelters, the need for shelter space has far outstripped the supply. Now, back in 2016, there might have been about 50 homeless families put up in hotels and motels on any given night. Now there are 230 families, and the city pays about $3,000 per month to put up a single family in a hotel. This year, the city has overspent its budget by nearly $6 million to house homeless families, and scores of homeless families, like this particular guy in the article, spends an average of 9 months in a motel room. I mean, it's better than the street, but surely by now they should have done something. This is not acceptable, according to Councillor Catherine McKenney, the Mayor's newly appointed Housing and Homeless Liaison Officer, and she believes that money would be better spent helping people pay their rent rather than going down this road of putting them in motels. But she also said to get a handle on the problems, the city also needs more dedicated shelter space. And the Director of Housing Services for the city said the problem predictably is funding. There's only a finite set of resources, according to Shelley Van Beerskerk. Really, there's only a finite set of resources. So the budget was overspent by $6 million. and yet Canada can afford to spend multi-millions on oil pipelines that we don't really need. Really. Or on military spending that they don't really need either. Where there's a will, there's always a way. Same applies in most other countries. Well, we covered the issue of prisons and a potential solution in a show not too far back. And I'm pleased to see that Congress today gave final approval to a bipartisan legislation which was supported by President Trump that would bring sweeping changes to prison sentencing and the treatment of inmates during incarceration and following their release. Now, the House of Representatives passed the bill 358 to 36 and was overwhelmingly approved by the Senate on Tuesday. Trump is expected to now sign it into law, and it's called the First Step Act, which has apparently been years in the making and represents an easing of tough law and order minimal sentencing requirements that has been imposed on judges that stem from a 1980s drive to clamp down on illegal drug epidemic in the United States. With about 2.2 million people incarcerated currently in the United States, many of them are serving long prison sentences for non-violent crimes. So this bill has now been passed and Trump will sign off on it. And these changes recognise the fundamental unfairness of a system that imposes lengthy imprisonment that is not based on the facts and circumstances of each offender and each case. Exactly. A charity this week has revealed a secret exchange between former US President George Herbert Walker Bush had with a Filipino boy that he was alleged to have sponsored over a 10-year period. Now, Bush had used a pseudonym, and the boy, who was 7 when the sponsorship started, had no idea who he was. He was operating under the name George Walker. And the boy, Timothy, learned his mentor's identity when he left the scheme at 17 and was stunned. And the charity Compassion International said and released some of the letters that Bush Sr. sent, including one where he says, "I'm an old man, 77 years old, but I love kids." Yes, indeed. "Though I have not met you, I love you already," he wrote. "I live in Texas. I will write from you from time to time. Good luck." If only we didn't know the backstory. Imagine anyone else, male listener, no matter what age, doing that. Isn't that called procurement? Why would they have interest in a Filipino boy? Well, sadly, too many of us who listen to this show and many other shows know the background of these elites and propensity to like children for various reasons. All about setting them up for future use, sadly.